The night shift at Zeldar Research Station was always quiet, and that's how Kong Doyen preferred it. At 45 years old, he had learned to appreciate solitude. The xenobiology wing stretched before him like a silent corridor of secrets. Its polished floors reflected the dim emergency lighting as his cleaning cart wheels squeaked softly against the tiles. Doyen wiped down another console with practiced movements. He was invisible to the researchers who had passed him earlier, without acknowledgement. The Valorians with their 4 eyes barely glanced his way. The insectoid Kresh clicked past, as if he were just another piece of furniture. 20 years as a janitor had taught him his place in the station's hierarchy. Somewhere below the coffee machines, he often joked to himself, but tonight felt different somehow. The air carried a strange tension that made the hair on his arms stand up. A sound stopped him mid-wipe. Faint, desperate, chirping. Doyen froze, his cloth hovering over the console screen. The sound came again, weaker this time. It reminded him of baby birds he had once found fallen from a nest back on Earth. Decades ago. That same helpless, pleading quality. He abandoned his cleaning cart and followed the sound down the corridor. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The chirping grew louder as he approached the restricted laboratory section. This was the area where only senior researchers were allowed. Doyen had cleaned these labs countless times, but always under supervision, always with someone watching. The door to Lab 7 stood slightly open. That was wrong. These doors were always sealed, always locked with biometric security. Frost crept along the edges of the doorframe like ghostly fingers. Doyen's breath missed in the air as he got closer. Something was very wrong. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The temperature hit him like a physical blow. It must have been well below freezing. The temperature display on the wall flashed angry red numbers, minus 12 degrees Celsius, and still dropping. In the center of the laboratory, inside a damaged containment chamber, 5 small creatures huddled together. They were shaking violently, their tiny bodies pressed against each other for warmth that wasn't there. Dragon hatchlings. Doyen had seen pictures of them in the station briefings. Each one was no bigger than a house cat. Their scales should have been brilliant gold, shimmering like precious metal. Instead, they had faded to a dull, sickly gray. Ice crystals were forming on their small, delicate wings. One of them raised his head weakly and looked at Doyen with eyes that seemed to plead for help. Doyen rushed to the environmental control panel. Sparks flew from the shattered circuits. The main climate system was completely destroyed. The backup heating unit had melted into a twisted piece of slag. Whatever had happened here, it had been catastrophic. Station AI emergency in Lab 7. Doyen called out, his voice sharp with urgency. The AI's calm voice responded immediately. Acknowledge. Emergency services have been dispatched. Estimated arrival time is 42 minutes. Climate control system is irreparable. Current hatchling survival probability is 12% and declining rapidly. 42 minutes. Doyen looked at the 5 dying creatures. They didn't have 42 minutes. They probably didn't have 20 minutes. One of the hatchlings had stopped moving entirely. Its chest barely rose and fell with shallow breaths. Doyen's mind raced. He needed to warm them up, and he needed to do it now. There were no portable heaters in this lab. The emergency thermal blankets were stored in the medical bay 3 floors away. By the time he got there and back, these hatchlings would be dead. His hand moved to his jacket zipper. His mother had always told him he felt too much, that he cared too much about things that weren't his concern. His ex-wife had called it his greatest weakness. She said he would give the shirt off his back to a stranger while his own family went without. Maybe she was right. But right now, 5 living creatures were dying in front of him, and he was the only person here. Doyen knelt beside the containment field barrier. His fingers flew across the access panel. 3 years of cleaning laboratories had taught him things. He had watched researchers input override codes hundreds of times while he emptied their trash bins, invisible and forgotten. They never thought the janitor was paying attention. The barrier flickered and dropped. "Forgive me if this is wrong," Doyen whispered to hatchlings. He unzipped his jacket and opened it wide. Then, as gently as he could, he gathered all 5 of the small dragons against his chest. Their scales were terribly cold against his skin, like touching ice. It almost hurt. He could feel 5 tiny hearts hammering frantically, desperately against his ribs. Their breathing was rapid and shallow. These were the last moments before death. He realized he was holding the final seconds of 5 ancient lives. Doyen zipped his jacket closed over them, sealing them against his body heat. He wrapped his arms around the outside of his jacket, holding them as close as possible. Then he sat down on the cold floor, his back against the wall, and waited. For several long minutes, nothing changed. The hatchlings continued to shake. Their hearts continued their frantic, irregular beating. Doyen closed his eyes and willed his body produce more heat, though he knew that wasn't how biology worked. Then the smallest one, pressed directly over his heart, released a soft sound. It was different from the desperate chirping. This was a vibrating purr, barely audible. The purr resonated through Doyen's chest like a gentle earthquake. One by one, the other hatchlings joined in. The sound grew stronger, more harmonious. Doyen opened his eyes and carefully opened his jacket, just enough to see them. Color was returning to their scales. The dull gray was giving way to brilliant gold. But there was something else, too. Streaks of deep crimson wound through the gold like threads of fire. He had never seen that color in any of the documentation photos. "That's it," Doyen murmured softly, keeping his voice low and soothing. "I've got you. You're safe now. I've got you." The purring intensified, and then Doyen felt something impossible. It wasn't coming from his own heart, but he felt it as clearly as his own emotions. Gratitude, relief, trust. The feelings washed over him like warm water. The hatchlings were somehow sharing their emotions with him. Station AI's voice interrupted the moment. "Unauthorized personnel detected in restricted zone. Please state the nature of your emergency and remain in place for security verification." Doyen looked down at the 5 small lives pressed against his chest. Their eyes were closed now, but their breathing had become steady and deep. They were sleeping, finally warm and safe. "The emergency," Doyen said quietly to the AI, "is that nobody else was here when they needed someone." 2 hours passed like a slow dream. Doyen's legs had gone completely numb an hour ago, but he didn't dare move even a centimeter. The hatchlings had fallen into a deep sleep against his chest. Their breathing had synchronized with his heartbeat in a way that felt both strange and deeply right. The cold floor beneath him had long since seeped through his uniform pants. His back ached from sitting in the same position against the hard wall. But every time he considered shifting his weight, one of the hatchlings would stir slightly, and he would freeze again. Their lives felt fragile in his arms, like holding glass that could shatter with the slightest wrong movement. "You know," Doyen whispered to the sleeping creatures, his voice barely audible in the quiet lab, "I have a daughter. Have. I don't know anymore which word is right." The smallest hatchling, the one pressed directly over his heart, chirped softly in its sleep. The sound was gentler now, not desperate like before, almost content. Doyen smiled despite his discomfort. "Her name is Hannah. She's 23 now. Can you believe that? 23 years old. She studies xenobiology on Mars. Hasn't spoken to me in 4 years, though." He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. Talking to these sleeping dragons felt easier than talking to a therapist ever had. Maybe because they couldn't judge him. Maybe because in this moment they needed him, and that felt good in a way he had forgotten. "Yeah, I messed up badly with her. The divorce was ugly. The kind of ugly that leaves scars on everyone involved. Her mother said I cared more about my work than my family." Doyen let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Funny thing is, she was right. I did care more about work. I just didn't know that work meant scrubbing floors while brilliant people changed the galaxy around me." The hatchling over his heart shifted slightly, pressing closer as if offering comfort. Doyen gently stroked its scales with one finger. They felt warmer now, smooth like polished stone. "I thought I was doing the right thing, you know? Working hard, providing, being responsible. But I missed Hannah's school plays, missed her birthdays, missed everything that actually mattered. I was always at work, always taking extra shifts. And for what? To be invisible, to be the man nobody sees." The lab doors suddenly hissed open. Doyen's head snapped up, his arms instinctively tightening around the hatchlings. A figure materialized through the doorway, literally materialized, its crystalline form refracting emergency lights into scattered rainbows across the walls. Crystal Lise, the station's Lumini medical officer, stood in the entrance. Her body was made of living crystal, transparent and glowing faintly from within. She was beautiful in an alien way that always made Doyen slightly uncomfortable. Security AI flagged this as a major contamination event. Crystal Lee said. Her voice sounded like wind chimes tinkling in a breeze. Then she saw Doyen sitting on the floor with his jacket bulging over the hatchlings. Oh my stars. They were dying, Doyen said simply. There was no apology in his voice, no regret, just fact. Crystal Lee moved closer, her crystalline feet making soft clicking sounds on the floor. She pulled out a medical scanner and waved it over Doyen and the hatchlings. The device hummed and beeped softly. Your body temperature is holding steady at 37.2 degrees Celsius, Crystal Lee said, studying her scanner's display with what looked like amazement. By all the stars in the void, Kong Doyen, do you realize what you're doing? You're producing more sustained heat output than our emergency heating units could generate at maximum power. Doyen blinked. I'm just sitting here. It's just normal body temperature. I'm human. This is what we do. Most spacefaring species maintain body temperatures between 20 and 28 degrees, Crystal Lee explained. Her voice carried a note of wonder. We evolved efficient technology precisely so we didn't need to waste metabolic energy maintaining high internal temperatures. It's considered primitive to burn so much energy just staying warm. She adjusted her scanner and moved it closer to the hatchlings. The device beeped more urgently now. But these hatchlings, their cellular structure isn't just stabilizing, it's thriving. They're actively absorbing nutrients from your skin's microbiome. Your sweat contains electrolytes and proteins that their species evolved alongside for thousands of years. This is remarkable. This is beyond remarkable. So they'll live? Doyen asked. That was the only thing that mattered to him right now. Because of you? Yes, they'll live. Crystal Lee tilted her crystalline head in a gesture that might have been respect. But we have another problem developing. Look at this neural pattern. She turned her scanner so Doyen could see the display. It showed 5 small brain patterns interlinked with a larger one. He didn't understand the technical readouts, but even he could see how the patterns were connected, like roots growing toward water. They've imprinted on your heartbeat, Crystal Lee explained. On a neurological level, they now recognize you as their parent. The bond is already forming at the deepest biological level. Doyen stared down at the 5 sleeping creatures nestled against his chest. Is that bad? That depends entirely on who you ask. Crystal Lee put away her scanner and began setting up monitoring equipment around them. Dr. Vellener designed this entire study to raise these hatchlings in complete isolation, pure behavioral observation, without any outside influence. He wanted pristine data. These babies were meant to be raised completely alone. Doyen felt anger rising in his chest like hot water coming to boil. The hatchlings stirred in response to his emotional change, their purring becoming slightly agitated. That's cruel. That's incredibly cruel. That's science, Crystal Lee said, but her tone suggested she didn't entirely agree with it either. Objective, controlled, uncontaminated. But between you and me? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. I've seen enough species go extinct in perfectly sterile laboratories. Sometimes survival needs more than perfect environmental conditions and optimal nutrition. Sometimes survival needs someone who actually cares whether you live or die. She finished placing the last monitoring sensor and stood back. I'm logging this as a medical emergency override in the system. You saved 5 Thar dragons, the last living examples of their species, in an entire known galaxy. That should buy you protection until morning at least. And then what happens? Doyen asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Crystal Lee paused at the door, looking back at him. Her crystalline face was difficult to read, but something in her posture seemed sad. Then Dr. Vellener returns from his conference. And then Kong Doyen, you'll probably wish you were still invisible and unnoticed. After she left, the lab fell silent again except for the soft purring of the hatchlings and the quiet beeping of the medical monitors. Doyen looked down at the 5 small lives that now depended on him. The smallest one, the one he was already thinking of his heart, opened one golden eye. She gazed up at him with an expression that looked unmistakably like trust, like love. "Don't worry, little ones," Doyen whispered, gently stroking heart scales. "I'm very good at being invisible when I need to be." Morning arrived with the fury of Dr. Velaner, and his rage filled the entire laboratory like a physical force. Contaminated, ruined, 20 years of preparation destroyed by a janitor. The Valerian researcher loomed over Doyen, his tall figure casting a shadow across the floor. All 4 of his eyes blazed with pure rage, their pupils dilated and trembling with emotion. Medical staff had finally convinced Doyen to transfer the hatchlings to a heated containment unit about an hour earlier. His body had been shaking with exhaustion and cold, and Crystalise had warned him about hypothermia if he stayed on that floor much longer. But the moment the dragons were placed in the containment unit, they had started crying. High-pitched, desperate sound that tore at Doyen's heart. They refused to settle down until Doyen pressed his hand flat against a transparent barrier. Now all 5 hatchlings were clustered on the other side, their small bodies pressed against the barrier exactly where his hand rested. They had finally stopped crying, but they watched him with anxious eyes, as if afraid he might disappear. They were dying, Doyen said as calmly as he could manage, though his heart was racing in his chest. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. The climate system failed. Nobody else was there. I did what anyone would do. Better dead than corrupted by unauthorized contact. Velaner's voice rose even higher, echoing off the laboratory walls. These are the last Cthar dragons in existence. Their behavioral patterns must be pristine for scientific study. Do you understand what pristine means? It means pure, uncontaminated, not tainted by the touch of some ignorant manual laborer. They're not specimens, Doyen said quietly, but with steel in his voice. They're children, living, feeling children. They are research subjects. Velaner's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. 20 years I have waited for these eggs to be ready for hatching. 20 years of planning every detail, every variable controlled. And in one night, you have made all of that meaningless. The laboratory doors opened again, and Station Director Byun Taeyun entered. He was a tall human with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many conflicts. 2 security officers flanked him, their expressions neutral and professional. The director's face was grim as he looked at Doyen. "Kong Doyen, you violated Protocol 7 of the Xenobiological Research Guidelines. The Draconian Council has been notified of this incident. They are demanding your immediate arrest for heritage interference. Given the political sensitivity of the situation, I have no choice but to... With respect, Director, you have every choice in this matter." Everyone turned to look at the young Draconian female, who had just spoken. Dr. Hiren stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly near the back of the room. Her silver scales caught the light beautifully as she moved. She was young for a senior researcher, probably only in her early 30s in human years. Doyen recognized her. She was one of the few people on the station who had ever bothered to say hello to him during his night shifts. Sometimes she worked late in the labs, and she would smile at him when he came to empty the trash. She would ask him how his evening was going, as if his answer actually mattered. "Dr. Hiren, this is not your concern," Velaner said sharply. "You are a junior researcher. You have no authority to speak here." "I have every authority to speak about flawed scientific methodology," Hiren replied calmly. "And Dr. Velaner, your isolation protocol was fundamentally flawed from the beginning." Velaner's scales flushed a deep purple color that Doyen had learned meant extreme anger in Valorians. "You dare question my methodology? I have 40 years of experience. I question methodology that ignores 10,000 years of our own history," Hiren said. She pulled out a data pad and projected holographic images into the air above them. Ancient images appeared, showing dragons and humanoid figures living together, playing together, caring for each other. Cthara dragons are social creatures, Hiren continued, her voice growing more confident. Our ancestors bonded with them for 10,000 years before we reached the stars and left our homeworld. They were our companions, our friends, our family. They helped us hunt. They warned us of danger. They mourned with us when we lost loved ones. The bond between Cthara dragons and Draconians is written into both our genetic codes. She swiped her hand, and the images changed to show scientific data, neural scans, biological readouts that Doyen couldn't fully understand but looked important. Raising them in complete isolation would have created psychologically damaged adults. Hiren said firmly, not pure behavioral data. You would have learned nothing except how dragons behave when they're traumatized and broken. Is that the legacy you wanted for your 20 years of work? Dr. Velaner. The Valerian researcher opened his mouth, then closed it again. His four eyes blinked in an uncoordinated pattern that suggested confusion. Crystalie stepped forward next, her crystal body chiming softly as she moved. Medical analysis supports Dr. Hiren's conclusions. She projected her own data into the air. Look at these cellular readings from hatchlings. They are healthier than any Cthara dragons in our historical records. The holographic display showed complex biological information. Even Doyen could see the vibrant colors indicating strong health markers. Kong Doyen's biochemistry provided something we couldn't replicate in our laboratories, Crystalie explained. Human sweat contains electrolytes, proteins, and trace elements. Human skin is covered in bacteria that don't harm the dragons, but actually help them. Human pheromones trigger comfort responses in the hatchlings. All of these things are factors that Cthara dragons evolved to need from their caregivers over millions of years. She turned to face Director Byun directly. He didn't contaminate the hatchlings. He completed them. He gave them what sterile laboratory conditions never could. He gave them the biological foundation they needed to develop properly. This is absurd. Velaner protested, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Humans are a barely spacefaring species. They've been in the galactic community for less than a century. How could they possibly? Humans are unprecedented in the galaxy. Hiren interrupted gently. They evolved caring for other species. They domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs. They befriended cats who served no practical purpose. They rescued injured birds and nursed them back to health. They kept horses and loved them. They protected wildlife that couldn't benefit them in any way. This behavior is hardwired into human neurology. She gestured at Doyen, who felt his face growing hot with embarrassment at suddenly being the center of attention. Most spacefaring species lost that instinct when we mastered technology. Hiren continued. We became efficient. We became logical. We built machines to care for things. So we didn't have to. We forgot how to love something simply because it needed love. We forgot what our ancestors knew, that some things matter more than efficiency and logic. At that moment, one of the hatchlings, the largest one that Doyen had mentally named Hope, suddenly spread her small wings. She released a cry that resonated through every being in the room. 3 weeks passed in what felt like both an eternity and a single breath. The dragons grew at an astonishing rate that shocked even the senior biologists. They were now the size of adult humans, their bodies sleek and powerful. Their scales shimmered with an unusual crimson-gold coloring that didn't match any Cthara dragon in the historical records. Scientists whispered that the bond with Doyen had somehow changed them at a fundamental level. Doyen had been moved to a specialized habitat on the station's lower levels. His small apartment adjoined a much larger chamber designed for the dragons. The walls were reinforced, the ceiling high enough for flight practice, and the temperature carefully controlled. But the best part was the door between the two spaces. It stayed open. Always. Okay, Hope gently, Doyen said, laughing as the largest dragon attempted to play fetch with a steel storage crate. The crate was nearly as large as Doyen himself, but Hope carried it in her jaws like it weighed nothing. That's not a toy. That's expensive equipment. Hope dropped the crate immediately. It hit the floor with a tremendous clang that echoed through the habitat. She made a guilty chirping sound and lowered her head, looking at Doyen with apologetic eyes. Doyen felt her embarrassment wash over him through the strange connection that had grown between them over the past weeks. It wasn't quite telepathy. He couldn't hear her thoughts as words, but he felt her emotions as if they were his own. Her guilt, her desire to please him, her worry that she had done something wrong. "It's okay, big girl," Doyen said, walking over to stroke her snout. "I know you were just playing, but maybe we should stick to the rubber balls, yeah?" Hope purred, the vibration so strong now that it made the floor tremble slightly. Relief and happiness flooded through the bond. Behind her, Dawn and Ember were wrestling playfully, their movements surprisingly graceful for creatures so large. Sky was practicing gliding from one of the elevated platforms, her wings spread wide. Hart, still the smallest, was curled up in Doyen's apartment, sleeping on his bed. The habitat door opened, and Hyarin entered carrying her data pad. Her expression was serious, which immediately made Doyen's stomach tighten with anxiety. The dragon sensed his emotional shift instantly. All of them stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him with concerned eyes. "The council hearing is tomorrow morning at 900 hours, Hyarin said, without preamble. "Are you prepared?" Doyen sat down on one of the equipment crates that Hope hadn't destroyed. "To defend myself to a room full of people who think I'm contaminating their heritage? Not really, no." Hyarin sat down beside him. The data pad in her hands displayed graphs and charts that looked important but meant little to Doyen. "You're not just defending yourself. This hearing will determine the future of the entire Dragon Restoration Project. If the Council rules against you, they'll take the hatchlings. They'll put them back in isolation protocols. Over my dead body," Doyen said quietly but with absolute conviction. Hope moved closer, pressing her large head against Doyen's shoulder. Through the bond, he felt her determination matching his own. The other dragons gathered around him, forming a protective circle. "That's actually what I'm worried about," Hyarin said softly. "Doyen, I need to tell you something. Something dangerous." She pulled up a new file on her datapad. Images appeared of draconians Doyen didn't recognize, their scales marked with unusual red patterns. This is a hegemony of the pure scale. They're a radical faction that believes Cthara dragons should die rather than be raised by non-draconians. They've been making threats since news of you and the hatchlings spread across the sector. Threats. Doyen's heart began to race. The dragons picked up on his fear immediately, their bodies tensing, ready for danger they didn't understand. Against you, against the dragons, against anyone supporting the cross-species guardian program. Hyarin looked him directly in the eyes. Station security is taking the threats seriously. They've increased patrols, but... She was interrupted by a sudden, sharp sensation that shot through Doyen's mind. It wasn't his own feeling. It was Hart's. The smallest dragon, sleeping in his apartment, had woken up suddenly. Terror, danger, wrong. "Something's wrong," Doyen said, standing up so fast he nearly knocked Hyarin off the crate. Hart senses something. Hart came running from the apartment, her eyes wide with fear. She was broadcasting distress so strongly that all 5 dragons began to vocalize, releasing warning cries that made the air vibrate. Then the habitat doors exploded inward with a deafening boom. 6 figures in environmental suits stormed through the smoking entrance, weapons drawn. The leader's voice boomed through his suit speaker system. "Hegemony of the pure scale. The human has corrupted the last of our sacred dragons. They must be cleansed before the contamination spreads." Cleansed. Horror washed over Doyen as he realized what they meant. "You want to kill them? Better extinct than tainted by inferior species," the leader shouted, raising what looked like a plasma injector. The weapon glowed with deadly energy. Before Doyen could move, before he could even think, Hope launched herself forward with a roar that shook the entire habitat. She moved faster than Doyen had ever seen her move, a blur of crimson and gold. She slammed into the leader with the force of a small vehicle, sending him crashing into the wall so hard that his environmental suit cracked. The other 4 dragons moved as one, their coordination so perfect it seemed choreographed. Dawn went left, Ember went right, Sky took to the air, and Hart positioned herself directly in front of Doyen, her small body trembling but determined to protect him. "Run!" Hyarin grabbed Doyen's arm, pulling him toward the maintenance exit on the far side of the habitat. "You have to run now." I can't leave them. Doyen tried to pull away, his eyes on the dragons who were fighting to protect him. They're defending you. If you stay, they'll be too focused on protecting you to defend themselves properly. Move. Through the bond, Doyen felt Hope's thoughts press into his mind. Not words exactly, but meaning that was crystal clear. Asterisk safe. We keep Father safe. Run, asterisk. Dawn's voice joined in. Simpler, more primal. Asterisk, we hunt together. We protect Pack. Asterisk. Ember, asterisk, Pack protects Pack. Always, asterisk. Sky, asterisk, Father taught us love. We teach them teeth. Asterisk. Heart, still trembling but fierce. Asterisk, come home soon. We wait. Asterisk. Tears streamed down Doyen's face as Hiren dragged him through the maintenance corridor. Behind them, the sounds of combat echoed. Dragon roars mixed with weapons fire and shouting. His heart screamed at him to go back, to help them, to not abandon the 5 lives he'd sworn to protect. But through the bond, he felt their determination, their absolute conviction that protecting him was worth any cost. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for their father. Hiren pulled him into a service elevator and hit the emergency controls. As the door closed, Doyen caught one last glimpse of Hope standing over 2 unconscious attackers, her scales blazing with reflected light, her eyes fierce and protective. The elevator rose rapidly toward the security level. Doyen collapsed against the wall, his whole body shaking. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity. Draconians from across the entire sector filled the galleries, their scales shimmering every color imaginable under the bright lights. Blues and greens and purples and silvers, all pressed together, watching in tense silence. Humans stood in their designated section near the back, diplomats in formal attire, reporters with recording devices, even military observers in uniform. Everyone watched with intense interest. This hearing would determine the fate of the last Cthara dragons in existence. Kong Doyen stood at the center of the massive chamber, feeling very small and very human. 5 enormous dragons were arranged behind him in a protective formation. Hope, the largest, rested her head gently on his shoulder. Her weight was substantial but comforting. Through their bond, he felt her trying to give him courage. High Counselor Miho sat at the elevated platform ahead. He was ancient, his silver scales marked with age patterns that spoke of centuries of life. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried naturally through the chamber, without need for amplification. Kong Doyen, the High Council began, his tone formal and grave. You stand accused of heritage corruption. The hegemony's attack upon you, while criminal and they will be prosecuted fully, stem from genuine concern. Concern that humanity has stolen what remains of Cthara dragons, the last living connection to our people's ancient past. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some draconians nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Doyen took a deep breath. His heart was racing so fast he thought everyone might hear it. With respect, Counselor, I didn't steal anything. I was simply there when no one else was. I was in the right place at the right time, doing my job. More murmurs spread through the galleries. Hope squeezed his shoulder gently with her jaw, careful not to hurt him. Support flowed through their bond. Dr. Velaner stood from his seat, his 4 eyes blazing. The human contaminated a pristine research study. 20 years of careful planning, destroyed in a single night. The behavioral data is now worthless. No. Hiren stood up from where she sat in the researcher section. Her silver scales caught the light as she moved to the speaking platform. The behavioral data is now accurate. Dr. Velaner, may I present my findings to the council? High Counselor Miho gestured his permission. Hiren activated her data pad, and holographic images filled the air above the chamber. Ancient images appeared first, showing the history everyone thought they knew. Cthara dragons were never meant to be studied in isolation, Hiren said, her voice clear and strong. For 10,000 years, our ancestors bonded with them. They were our companions, our friends, our family members. Look at these historical records. The images showed young draconians playing with young dragons. Adult dragons protecting draconian children. Dragons and draconians hunting together, mourning together, celebrating together, living together as one community. When we reached the stars and left our homeworld, we brought technology that made us efficient. Hiron continued. We no longer needed dragons to help us hunt. We no longer needed them to warn us of danger. We built machines to do everything. And slowly, over generations, the dragons began to die out, not because of disease, not because of environmental change. They died because we stopped bonding with them. She changed the images to show scientific data, neural scans, biological markers, genetic sequences. Clara dragons are biologically designed to bond with a caregiver species, Hiron explained. Their neural development requires emotional connection. Their immune systems need the bacteria and proteins from a caregiver's touch. Their psychological health demands social interaction. Isolation doesn't preserve them. It kills them slowly from the inside. Dr. Velaner stood again, his scales flushing purple with anger. This is speculation. We have no proof that. We have 5 dragons as proof, Crystalise interrupted, her crystal body chiming as she stood. I have conducted extensive medical examinations over the past 3 weeks. These 5 hatchlings are healthier than any Cthara dragon in our historical medical records. Stronger bones, better neural development, superior immune response. They are thriving because they have what all dragons need, a parent who loves them. She projected her medical data into the air. Even from where he stood, Doyen could see the vibrant colors indicating exceptional health. But they're bonded to a human. An elderly draconian in the gallery called out. Not to us. We've lost them to another species. Hiron smiled gently. Actually, no. Watch this. She walked toward the dragons. Hart, the smallest, was closest to her. The young dragon watched Hiron approach with curious eyes. Then, slowly, carefully, Hart stepped forward and lowered her head, allowing Hiron to touch her scales. Hart began to purr. The sound resonated through the entire chamber. She accepts me, Hiron said, her voice thick with emotion. They all do. The bond isn't exclusive. It's expansive. Dragons don't hoard love. They multiply it. They can bond with many individuals, not just one. That's what makes them so special. Doyen felt Hope's encouragement through their bond. He took a step forward, his voice quiet but clear. They're not lost to you. They never were. I didn't take them from you. If anything, I'm trying to give them back. Hope raised her magnificent head and began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Doyen had ever heard before. Beautiful and haunting and ancient. Dawn joined in, then Ember, then Sky, then Heart. Their 5 voices harmonized perfectly, creating a song that seemed to reach into every heart in the chamber. Tears appeared in draconian eyes. Some of the older counselors covered their faces with their hands. The Song of Kinship, High Counselor Miho whispered, his ancient voice breaking. I never thought I would hear it in my lifetime. My grandfather told me stories of this song, but I thought it was lost forever. When the song ended, the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Hiron spoke again. I proposed a cross-species guardian program, she said formally. Humans and draconians working together to raise the remaining 47 eggs currently in stasis. Not in laboratories, not in isolation. In homes, with families, with love. Let us combine human caregiving instincts with draconian cultural knowledge. Together, we can restore what should never have been lost. Preposterous, Dr. Velaner sputtered. Humans barely understand our culture. They've been in space for less than a century. Then we will learn. A voice called from the human section. Director Byun stepped forward, speaking clearly. Earth has volunteered the facilities at Korea Station for this program. Our xenobiological institutes have offered funding and resources. Humanity would be deeply honored to help restore what should never have been allowed to die. High Counselor Miho sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. His ancient eyes moved from Doyen to the dragons to Hiron to the galleries filled with his people. Finally he spoke. Show me what these dragons can truly do. Doyen closed his eyes and reached through the bond to all 5 dragons. He didn't use words. He shared a feeling.